He didn't mean to ruin anything. Cal had spent the entire week choosing the right wrapping paper, the right ribbon, the right words. It was their anniversary, his parents' silver celebration, and he wanted to give them something that meant more than flowers or store-bought cards. He wanted to be seen, just once, just as he was. But the box that sat on the dining table that night didn't carry what he thought it did. And when it was opened, it shattered the room, not because it was loud, but because it was too quiet. Cal Turner had always been the dependable son, the straight-A student, the polite young man at church who held the door for others. But behind closed doors, behind a bedroom door lined with rainbow pins hidden in a shoebox, he was just a boy trying to breathe. The plan was simple. He had written a heartfelt letter to his parents, a personal thank you, a tribute to their sacrifices, their marriage, their commitment. He folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope marked for Mom and Dad, and placed it inside a polished wooden box with gold hinges. But what he didn't notice, in the rush of getting ready, in the excitement of trying to be thoughtful, was that there were 2 letters on his desk that evening. The second letter was never meant to leave his room. It was handwritten too, but the tone was different. It was a confession, a truth, a letter to someone named Ryan, a classmate, a teammate, a boy Cal had secretly loved for almost a year. The letter was raw, vulnerable. He had poured everything into it. How he had first noticed Ryan during baseball tryouts. How the way he smiled made Cal's chest ache. How he hated pretending every day. And how he wished he could tell someone in that moment of carelessness. Cal sealed the wrong letter. He didn't realize it. Not even when he set the gift beside the cake in the kitchen. He didn't know, not until later, when the living room lights dimmed and everyone gathered around to see what the eldest son had so sweetly prepared. The Turner home in suburban Florida was tidy, beige, and quiet. The kind of place where children don't talk back, where everything had its place. His father, a retired Navy officer, still polished his boots every Saturday. His mother, Laura, decorated the house with seashells and verses from Psalms. They weren't cruel, but they were strict. Faith and order came first. As guests arrived for the dinner, Cal helped Emily, his younger sister, fold napkins into swans. He smiled through it all. Even when his mother kissed his cheek and said, "You always do everything just right, Cal." He swallowed the guilt, the worry, the feeling that something was off. When the moment came, after the prayer and before dessert, his mother reached for the wooden box. Cal stood beside the table, heart thudding but proud. He watched as she undid the ribbon, lifted the lid, and unfolded the single page. Her eyes moved quickly across the lines, then stopped, then narrowed. His father leaned over to read too. Silence fell like a blackout. No one said a word. The only sound was Emily's fork clinking gently against her plate. And then his mother folded the letter again, carefully, like it was made of glass. She set it down, stood up, and left the room. No questions, no screaming, just silence. Cal didn't know what had happened. Not yet, but his spine felt cold. He walked over, pretending to straighten the napkins, and glanced down. The envelope lay open on the table. The name Ryan was written on the back in blue ink. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. The room, still full of neighbors and friends, felt like a furnace. He didn't remember what came next. Not clearly. A blur of polite goodbyes, of people pretending nothing happened, of eyes that wouldn't meet his. But he remembered his father's voice later that night. Low, flat, sharp. "We'll talk in the morning." And Cal sat in his room, staring at the ceiling, thinking one thought over and over. They weren't supposed to know. Not like this. This was the night that changed everything. But it wasn't the end, because the letter they read wasn't the last thing Cal had to say. If this story speaks to something inside you, if you've ever hidden a part of yourself and watched it come to light the wrong way, then stay with us. Cal's journey is just beginning. Subscribe to Heart Stories so you won't miss what comes next. The next morning wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic or confrontational. It was worse than that. It was cold toast left uneaten, a kitchen chair pushed back too quickly, a father reading the newspaper upside down without realizing it, and a mother who didn't say good morning. Cal sat in silence, the kind that wraps itself around your ribs and tightens every time someone enters the room. He waited for a word, a glance, anything, but none came. His parents moved around him like he wasn't there, as if they could undo the night before simply by not naming it. Emily had questions, of course. She was too young to understand the weight of it all, but she wasn't stupid. Over breakfast, she leaned in and whispered, "Did you write something scary? Cal, was that a secret story?" He smiled at her gently, too gently, and just said, "It wasn't meant to be read like that." She nodded like she understood, even though she didn't. The hours ticked by like glass cracking, slow, sharp, impossible to ignore. Cal didn't go to school. He didn't even try. Every step outside his room felt like stepping onto a minefield. By noon, the silence broke, but not in the way he hoped. His mother knocked softly on his door, but didn't wait for a response. She entered with a folded blanket in her hands, something to do with her fingers. Her voice was steady, but her eyes looked everywhere but at him. "We're going to speak with someone," she said. "Pastor Whitlock. He's helped a lot of families with this kind of confusion." She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. Cal didn't speak. He couldn't find the right tone between fury and heartbreak. Later that evening, his father came home with a kind of quiet anger that was far more dangerous than shouting. He placed a Bible on the dining table and tapped the cover once with his knuckle. That was his message. Read, repent, return to who they thought he was. Dinner was stiff. The chairs felt sharper. Every clink of a spoon sounded like a judgment. When his mother passed him the salt, she couldn't meet his eyes. Emily tried to make a joke about the burnt rice. No one laughed. Afterwards, Cal went back to his room. He sat at his desk, staring at the drawer that once held the letters, the place where everything started. His fingers hovered over the wood, but he didn't open it. There was nothing inside anymore except the echo of a mistake. He thought about Ryan. Ryan, who didn't know. Ryan, who sat 2 rows behind him in chemistry and once lent him a hoodie when it rained. Ryan, who had never done anything but smile like the world didn't weigh on him. What would he think now? Had someone told him? Had the rumor started already? As the sun went down, Cal's phone buzzed. One message, from a number saved without a name, but he knew it by heart. "Hey, you okay?" No signature, no explanation, but somehow it was enough. Cal didn't reply, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. How do you explain that your truth accidentally exploded across the dinner table on your parents' most sacred day, that they saw it, and instead of love, they saw shame that night? Something shifted. Cal stood in front of the hallway mirror and looked at himself for a long time. Not to admire, not to judge, but to ask a question. Do I still recognize you? His reflection didn't answer, but his eyes did. This wasn't just a phase. This wasn't a rebellion. This was him. And if they couldn't love him like this, then maybe, just maybe, he needed to start writing a new kind of letter. One that didn't ask for permission to exist. He sat at his desk again, this time with a new pen, a blank page. But before he could start, the house phone rang. Loud, sudden, unusual. His father answered. The voice on the other end asked for Cal. It was Pastor Whitlock, and he wanted to see him the next morning. Cal closed his eyes. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. Cal sat in the passenger seat the next morning, dressed in a button-down shirt that didn't feel like his. His mother drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale against the leather. They didn't speak during the ride. There wasn't even music playing, just the sound of air conditioning fighting off the Florida humidity, and the occasional turn signal clicking like a metronome measuring the distance between them. The church office smelled like old books and lemon disinfectant. Pastor Whitlock greeted them with the same rehearsed warmth he used for every Sunday handshake. He was a tall man with perfect posture and eyes that scanned people rather than met them. He led Cal into a small room behind the sanctuary while Laura waited in the foyer. The door clicked shut. The pastor offered a seat. Then he opened a leather notebook. He didn't ask how Cal was feeling. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply said, "Sometimes young men go through seasons of temptation. It's not uncommon, but the danger is pretending that temptation is identity." Cal stared at the bookshelf, his stomach twisted, but he said nothing. The session lasted less than half an hour, but the words clung to him like static. Phrases like unnatural desires, a father's disappointment, a mother's grief. They weren't shouted, they were whispered, soft, controlled. Each sentence was coated with concern, but anchored in shame. When they got home, his father didn't ask about the meeting. He simply nodded once, as if something had been decided. That evening, his mother left a pamphlet outside Cal's room. It was titled, "Returning to God's Design." He didn't pick it up. Instead, he opened his laptop and stared at the message still sitting in his inbox. "You okay?" It had been 2 days. He hadn't replied. He didn't even know if Ryan had sent it out of kindness or curiosity. Maybe someone had said something, maybe not. But Cal couldn't shake the feeling that a door had been cracked open. Just a little, just enough. That night, during dinner, something unexpected happened. Emily, seated between her parents, asked in her usual small voice, "Why don't we talk to Cal anymore?" The room froze. Laura glanced at her husband. He wiped his mouth slowly, then spoke without looking up. "Because some things don't need to be discussed at the table." Emily blinked, then said, "Even if it's the truth." No one answered. After dinner, Cal retreated to his room, but instead of sitting at his desk, he pulled a shoebox from under his bed. Inside were pieces of himself he had never shared. A journal, some photos, a bracelet he once got at a pride event he had secretly attended during a school trip. Small things, honest things, pieces of a person he wasn't allowed to be under this roof. He didn't cry, he didn't break. He just sat, holding the bracelet in his hand, thinking about how much easier it would be if he could disappear for a while. Not run away, just be invisible. The next day at school, he kept his head down. Hallways felt longer, classrooms quieter. He couldn't tell if people were staring or if it was all in his head. At lunch, he sat alone, but as he picked at his sandwich, a tray landed across from him. It was Ryan. He didn't say anything at first, just unwrapped his lunch, took a sip of juice, then finally looked up. "You never wrote back." Cal's throat tightened. "I didn't know what to say." Ryan nodded, then shrugged. "You don't have to. Just, you look like you needed someone to ask." They didn't talk much after that, but they finished lunch together. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture. But to Cal, it was the first time since the letter that something felt real again. When he got home, his father was waiting. There was a suitcase on the couch. "I called your great-aunt Margaret," he said. "She's offered to take you in for a while. A change of environment might help you get back on track." It wasn't a request. It was a plan already made. Without him, Cal stood still, not angry, not surprised, just numb. He nodded once, quietly, then went upstairs. But that night, he didn't pack. Instead, he wrote a new letter. This one wasn't to his parents, and it wasn't to Ryan either. It was to himself. A promise that no matter what house he ended up in, no matter what Bible verse was thrown at him, no matter who turned away first, he would not be erased. He folded the letter and placed it in his shoebox. Then he sat by the window, watching the neighborhood lights flicker like stars just out of reach. This wasn't over, but something inside him had already begun to shift. He wasn't running, he was waiting, and the right moment was coming. He left without the suitcase. No one saw him go. No one asked why the guest room remained empty. On the morning he was supposed to board a bus to Texas, Cal slipped out of the house with only a backpack, a wallet, and the letter he had written to himself. He didn't go far, just far enough. There was one person in the world he could still imagine looking him in the eye without flinching. It had been almost 5 years since he last saw his grandfather. Harold Turner was the black sheep of the family, not because he had done something unforgivable, but because he had once said something unforgettable: truth matters more than reputation. That was enough for Cal's father to cut ties. They never said the words out loud, but Cal knew. Harold was considered dangerous, unpredictable, unfit for influence. Cal remembered his grandfather's house from childhood visits, a small home with a porch swing that never stopped creaking, a bookshelf in every room, and always a place at the table, even for a boy who spilled orange juice on the rug or asked too many questions. That's where he went. When Harold opened the door and saw his grandson standing there, backpack slung over one shoulder and no explanation ready, he didn't ask anything. He stepped aside and said only, "You hungry?" That night, Cal ate without fear. He didn't tell the whole story immediately, but Harold didn't press. He made hot tea, pointed to the spare room, and left the door open, both literally and otherwise. Over the next few days, the house began to feel like skin that fit. Cal read books without hiding the covers. He walked barefoot across the living room and didn't flinch when a floorboard creaked. He laughed once while helping repair the porch steps. A real laugh, not the kind he used at church to blend in, and Harold let him be. No sermon, no pity, just space. But freedom doesn't silence the past. It makes you hear it clearer. One afternoon, as Cal was helping organize a stack of papers in the back room, he found an envelope labeled Turner Family Archive. Inside were old photographs, clipped newspaper articles, and handwritten notes from decades ago. One page stopped him cold. A letter from Harold, addressed to Cal's father. It was dated the year Cal was born. The letter was calm, but firm. In it, Harold had begged his son to raise Cal differently, to choose empathy over fear, curiosity over control. The last paragraph read, "If he turns out anything like me, I hope you won't treat him like you treated me." Cal's hands shook. So it wasn't just him. Harold hadn't only lost connection with the family over politics or pride, he had been pushed out, too, branded as different. And long before Cal was old enough to spell the word gay, someone else in his bloodline had already carried that unspoken name. Later that night, as they sat on the porch watching lightning bugs pulse in the distance, Cal asked the question that had been building since the day he arrived. "Was it you?" Harold didn't answer at first. Then he sipped his tea and said, "Let's just say, then, I learned to survive in silence long before you were born." There was no shame in his voice, just truth. And something else happened, too. Harold went into his study and returned with a document. It wasn't large, just a few typed pages. But when Cal read the title, Last Will and Testament of Harold Benjamin Turner, his breath caught. Harold had changed it, years ago. And Cal's name wasn't just in it, it was central. Harold hadn't chosen his son, he hadn't chosen his daughter-in-law. He had chosen Cal, the one person who, in his words, would understand the weight of legacy and carry it with grace. The study wasn't filled with stocks or land deeds. It held a rare collection of first edition books, private correspondence from civil rights leaders, unpublished research from Harold's academic career, and a scholarship fund he had quietly built for years. And it was all to go to Cal, not out of revenge, but restoration. "I don't need you to fight them," Harold said softly. "I just need you to never become them." The next morning, Cal called home. His father answered. Cal said only one sentence. "I'm safe. I'm not coming back right now." Then he hung up. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Emily had overheard everything, that she had followed the hushed conversations, that she had read the pamphlets left outside Cal's room, and that, in her quiet way, she had already made a plan of her own. A child's plan, simple, naive, but powerful, because sometimes the person who changes everything is the one nobody expects. The first sign that something had changed came not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through an envelope. It arrived on a Thursday, addressed in looping handwriting that Cal recognized instantly. Emily. Inside was a drawing, a crude sketch of three stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Beneath it, in blue crayon, were the words, "I miss you. I told them everything." It took Cal 3 tries to read it without crying. He called the house that night, not expecting anyone to answer. But Emily did. She was breathless, whispering from inside her closet so no one would hear. She told him how she had waited until Sunday dinner, how she had looked their parents in the eyes and said, "He didn't ruin anything. You did. You stopped loving him out loud." She said it just like that. No tears, no fear, just the truth, from the only person in the family still unafraid to speak it. Cal listened, heart tight, as she told him that after her words, their mother left the table and their father didn't say a word for 5 minutes. But no one interrupted her. No one scolded her. Then came the real shock later that night. Laura knocked on Emily's door, sat on the edge of her bed, and asked quietly, "Do you still talk to your brother?" Emily said yes, and Laura whispered, "Next time, no, tell him I want to listen." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a full bridge, but it was something. Days passed, then weeks. Cal didn't rush home. He wasn't ready, but he began writing again, this time not to hide, not to confess, but to understand himself. Harold encouraged it. Some letters he mailed, others he read aloud during their evening porch rituals. He found in that old man's quiet presence the thing he had been begging for all along, not answers, just space. One afternoon, while shelving books in Harold's study, Cal stumbled upon a folder labeled Heartwood Archives. Inside were essays, poems, and letters written by queer authors throughout American history, people erased from their time but held close by Harold. In the margin of one essay, a note in Harold's handwriting read, "Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you choose to carry forward." That's when Cal knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. Not because he owed anything to the people who'd wounded him, but because he had something they couldn't take, truth tethered to dignity. So he wrote one last letter, not to Ryan, not to his parents, to the town. It was published in the local paper under the title, "I Wasn't a Mistake. You Just Weren't Looking." In it, he told the story of the letter that changed everything, how it was read on the wrong day, in the wrong room, by the wrong people. But how that mistake made him right with himself. He signed it, Cal Turner, son, brother, student, gay. It spread faster than he imagined. At school, Ryan walked up to him in the library, held out his phone, and showed Cal that half their classmates had reshared the article. Not all reactions were kind, but none of them were silence. 1 week later, Cal returned home, not permanently, just for dinner. The table was set, the chairs were the same, but something in the room felt lighter. His father was quieter than usual. No handshake, no speech, but when Cal passed him the bread, their hands touched, and neither of them pulled away. Laura brought out dessert. She had baked his favorite. Said nothing, but the plate had a note folded beneath it. One sentence, "I didn't know how brave you were until I stopped looking away." That night, before leaving, Cal walked out to the backyard. Emily followed him, tugged his sleeve, and asked, "So, are you still writing letters?" Cal smiled. "No, I think I'm done writing to people who won't read them." She nodded and then said, "Good. Then maybe it's time they start writing back." He looked up at the sky, felt the air shift, and knew not every family has to break to be rebuilt. But sometimes, a crack is what lets in the light. Have you ever said the truth out loud and watched everything change? Tell us your story or the letter you never sent. And if Cal's journey touched something in you, subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that speak where words once hid.